Those of you that made it possible for us to have a quorum, we are really grateful for that.
Studio, we ready to go live?
Grateful for the opportunity to have a meeting and to start it in a reasonable amount of delay. So, good afternoon. I'd like to call our first council budget workshop for FY 2026 budget development into order. As you know, this is one of the most important and impactful policy items that we work with together each year in developing a plan to allocate the city resources in alignment with our strategic priorities and the needs of our community. So I want to thank every one of you that came in on time today for joining us, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to the city manager.
So, Mayor, thank you, Mayor, members of council. So we'll just jump right into it. We have an economic outlook and a budget update. This is not dissimilar to what we've done in the previous years, what is a bit different is we tried during the annual strategy meeting to go under the hood a bit more in terms of what's in the budget, in terms of all of the different funds. Today, we will be focusing on the general fund, as well as what's happening around public safety, and that's a little prelude to the conversation we'll have tonight also. But with that said, Mayor, if there aren't any questions, I'd like to turn it over to Marie and the Budget and Finance team.
Thank you very much. Let's see, there you are behind that way, Marie. Thank you.
Thank
We're
you,
ready.
and good afternoon. And as we get started, as the manager mentioned, we're going to do a budget overview quickly, an economic outlook, and then get into some of the real considerations as we're moving forward with the development of our fiscal year 2026 budget and then looking ahead. And first, of course, you're all familiar with your strategic priorities, council strategic priorities, but we really wanted to make sure and put this front and foremost because all the funding decisions and decisions we make and performance metrics we come up with are weighed against advancing your strategic priorities. And along with that, the budget is one of your main policy documents. It touches all of your priorities and in particular well managed. This is how we allocate your resources, the community's resources, to advancing your strategic priorities and set a strong foundation, financial foundation for all we do. And then just quickly for and this is building upon what we discussed at your annual strategies meeting. We talked about the AAA rating we have and how important that is to, and how we've built that over time and are continuing to protect that. We talked about how city services are provided at a comparatively low cost than other North Carolina cities, and how property tax, although it's our greatest revenue generator for the general fund, it's also flat and not growing, except it doesn't grow when we get reevaluation. It only grows with new construction being added. And we also talked about how we, even though we're a good value, how we monitor performance and the trade-offs between efficiencies, cost savings, and performance, and that public safety costs continue to drive the budget. And each of these we're going to build on today further. And again, strong financial management practices, this really helps the city. We shine forward with debt and creditors. It allows us to do more with our money. It allows us also to be seen as a strong financial foundation for institutions giving us grants and things like that as well. And as we talked about in the retreat, comparing the costs of government. And one thing we talked about briefly at our committee meeting, you know, some residents say, yes, your property taxes are flat, but other fees increase. And yes, all fees increase over time, not just with our city, other cities as their contract costs increase. But this graph is not just property taxes. It's fully loaded for an average resident with property taxes for the city and the county, sales tax, our solid waste fee, and stormwater and water. So we still are very low compared to our peers. And our property tax is low too, but that's something we have to keep an eye on, how we can keep maintaining good value at the same time meeting the service expectations of our community. And there's a whole lot of words on this slide, but this is, I believe at the strategy session, Councilmember Mitchell mentioned, we don't do enough to highlight our success. And this is very much a success. Council has adopted strategies recently that really support our workforce. And it's just important to note, in 2018, the minimum hourly wage was $13.58. It is now $23 an hour. That's a 70% increase that council has put forward. We've, over time with COVID and the healthcare costs going up, the city of Charlotte's absorbed more of the cost burden to help relieve some of that cost from, it still goes up for our employees, but we've helped to balance it with the city in some instances taking on a greater share. And council has recently done shift differentials, so it was new in the last couple of years, and commercial driver's license premiums that have really helped our operations positions. And really, this is a real highlight. I know it's a lot of words on the page, but do you realize in police, fire, and our hourly, all since 2019 have increased over 30% in salaries. And that is a really big deal. And then as of November 2024, 90% of our staff are making at least $50,000. So again, there's a
97.
lot of words on that page, but it's important to highlight. Yes, ma'am? Oh, sorry, yeah, that's not, sorry. 97% are making at least 50, sorry. Yeah, sorry. And then this is also important because of the general fund, 73% is personnel cost. And as we mentioned before, public safety is a big driver, and 73% of the personnel costs are in police and fire. So these are definitely budget considerations moving into 2026. And as you know, as we discussed some at the retreat, in general, we always look at revenues and outlook of revenues and what our expenses are going to be. And the incremental growth, and then when you say incremental growth, that's moving this current fiscal year forward into FY26 with no pay plan and no enhancements, just contract increases and annualizing things that we've already done in 2025. That's an increase of $30.4 million, and we're projecting revenue at $30.9 million. So we're $500,000 to the good without a pay plan. So that's definitely what we're working towards moving forward. But this isn't different than prior years. We've been here before, and we're really working hard to analyze revenues and efficiencies. And then I'll talk some more about that, but right now I'll turn over to Dr. Tazafor for an overall economic outlook. The clicker's not working.
It's not?
Use the arrow button.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council.
Good afternoon, and
Before I start, I just wanted to, wanted us to talk about where we are today with regards to the economy. And so the most recent data that we have right now is for the year 2023. So as of 2023, the Charlotte MSA grew by about 4.7%, which was faster than that of the state and the nation. So if you look at the chart, which shows you the economic growth, or we call it GDP growth, over time, you realize that the Charlotte MSA, which is the line in green, we've been faring way better, or better than the nation since 2019. As of 2023, the major contributors, we're talking about industry sectors. The major, not surprising, finance and insurance contributed much to that growth. Professional and business services, information, and retail trade. So we've been doing well as a city, But looking forward, what are we expecting? So I was looking at a couple of projections from different banks and other entities, and a lot of them, consensus is about 2.5% growth in 2026. So there are currently no projections of a recession. They're expecting some growth, but slower. So we've been doing better as a city. What you're looking at right now is the number of housing units that have been permitted and completed in the city of Charlotte. And so the data you're looking at is from 2014 through 2024. And you'll realize that 2023 and 2024 were very, very good years for us. However, going from 2023 to 2024, you would realize, I'm looking at the dark green bars. 2023 to 2024, you see a slight decrease, but it's still relatively strong. So even though the number of housing permits declined, it has remained relatively strong. And number of housing units completed has been going up since 2022. And growing really rapidly. So on average, I was looking at the data, on average, it takes about 7 to 9 months for a single family unit to get from when they get your permit to when they get a certificate of occupancy, about 7 to 9 months. For multifamily units, it takes about 19 to 21 months. And so when I just look at that data of the number of housing units that have been permitted and completed, you can tell, again, just looking at our average household size, the current vacancy rates significantly this year and the coming years. And so when we look at these numbers and we're looking at the time it takes for these units to be permitted and completed, you can tell if you're looking at 2024, we have a lot of units that have been permitted, and those should be coming online. So they'll be getting added to the property tax rolls in the next 7 to 8 months. So the two key indicators that's usually in the media, interest rates and inflation. So the Federal Reserve has, in my opinion, has done a very good job in managing inflation. So inflation has fallen from a high 9.1% that we saw sometime in 2022. We're currently at 2.9%. It's still not gotten to that 2% that the Federal Reserve likes. However, looking at that chart, you'd see that 2.9%, it still hovers around where we were before the recession. And also talking about the interest rates, the Federal Reserve, I mean, like I said, the Federal Reserve has done a good job in managing inflation, and right now we're at 4.3%. At their last meeting, they held the interest rate, and we'll just wait to see what happens in their March meeting. So following up from that conversation about inflation, if you look at the chart, you'd realize that beginning in July of 2022, looking at that inflation was like, again, right around 9%. With such high inflation, of course, you would expect to see higher prices, and so eventually we see higher sales tax revenues. But however, if you look at the trend, if you look at that trend going down, you'd realize that it's been declining. It's been declining over time. And so looking at the data, there's some evidence of a slowing in retail and food spending. However, it looks to be stabilizing to what we saw before 2020. I was just looking at the data on credit card debt. It's at an all-time high now. And again, we just meant households need to pay more in interest rate payments. The other thing which significantly affects consumer spending or gives us a clue about where we think consumer spending is going to be is the personal savings rate. The personal savings rate before the recession, the 2020 recession, was right around 6%. Today, as of December 2025, that's supposed to be 2024. That was an error. So as of December 2024, that savings rate is 3.8%, which just means a lot of households are eating into that personal savings and might not have money to spend in the coming months. So, given all of that information, what you see here is the sales tax growth and our forecast. So the latest data we got for sales tax was for the month of November, and it came in at about 3.2%. For the remainder of this coming months, we're projecting a 3.5% growth. And eventually, for 2026, we think, or we are projecting a growth of 3.5% over our current 2025 projections. So there's a lot that's currently going on right now from a national standpoint. So these are just some key indicators to watch, because this will eventually play a role in our final projections for 2026. So some key things to watch: tariffs. Just for a start, there's talk in the media about a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. Again, that would have significant impacts on our CIP projects. So those are some of the things we just got to watch for. Immigration, we'll continue to look at consumer spending. We'll continue to look at construction trends and unemployment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tesfor. And then we're getting back into specific budget considerations for Charlotte. And as you know, we have a lot of different measures we put in place, but this is an important one. If you remember, we talked about how the general fund is 73% of the general fund is salaries. And our employees are our most valuable resource, so we definitely track retention and recruitment. And as you'll see, even though we've added 723 more positions, our vacancy rate is still decreasing from where it was in 2020. So we continue to monitor that, and we're making progress and in a positive direction. And this is another example of how we continue to hire more positions in the general fund. And this is very important when we talk about recruiting and retaining people and getting some of the best talents and skill set here. We definitely need to work on budgeting for a pay plan, and that's why it's one of our predominant focuses moving forward. And as we mentioned, the public safety budget drives a lot. It's one of our core services, and a lot of our general fund staff are there. 73% of the 73% cost of the general fund are for public safety personnel. And just in general, too, the public safety drives the general fund budget. 62% of the general fund budget is allocated to police and fire. So they definitely are strong drivers, not only as our strong core service, but also when we're looking at budget development. And recent investments in public safety, we've made a lot of investments in facilities, and staff and pay ranges and equipment needed. One thing important to notice, when we get a new firehouse activated, we have to have a new company of staff to man that station. Whereas police are typically, when we build a new police station, typically we're moving from a leased facility into a city-owned facility, so it's not as intensive as far as FTE increases. And then when we're looking at building the next year's budget, some of the funding we've done in '25 are considerations for moving forward into '26. Like when we do a new fire company, sometimes we don't have them all starting July 1. So it's not a full year's budget in '25, but it would be a full year budget moving into FY '26. So we've got new fire positions and we've got needs for technology and gear moving forward into '26 and that we know of. So that's part of the base budget moving forward. And then we also have things on the horizon, like a new Miranda Road Fire Station that will need to be staffed with employees and equipment. Another big consideration is delay of ordering engines, and we'll get into that further in another slide, but there's a huge delay, not just with fire apparatus, but other big equipment that used to take a year to get, that takes several years to get now from the time we place the order. There's ongoing need for equipment replacement. You know, we have radios listed here. Radios, you know, to the public might mean, oh, it's a radio, it's nice to have in your truck. No, these are the public safety radios that police and fire use to communicate with each other, and they are their lifeline during crisis events. And they are on a separate radio system and require specialized equipment. And we'll also be, for both police and fire, looking at making sure the health and contributions to the retirement systems remain. And we're always looking at cost recovery of all our services, but for public service, for public safety, a big one that's ongoing right now, as you all know, is fire department serves as first responders for medic. And that's been an agreement for years and years and years, that one that we're looking at now more actively. Charlotte, also Davison and Huntersville are independently working with medic. And this isn't just cost, it's also service levels. But since we're talking about budget, we're going to say it does have a cost impact when we're moving forward with the budget. Current considerations include, for the towns, medic reimburses at a rate of 20.96 cents per call. For the city of Charlotte, we have a flat fee that's just under $500,000. So those will be considerations moving forward. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude, last fiscal year, Charlotte Fire Department ran just under 85,000 calls for medic as first responder. And that reimbursement rate that we currently get is less than $6 per call, or less than 5% of our cost of the cost. And we're estimating the cost fully loaded to be $10.3 million. Now, we're definitely not saying we need that full $10.3 million from medic, but that is a consideration when we're looking at service levels and reimbursement levels, and that will be a big consideration moving forward when we're developing the next year's budget. But the fire chief and medic and others are actively working through not only cost reimbursement, but the service levels to ensure our community gets the same level of service. And then for police, some of the ongoing investments, some of the investments you've made in your 2025 budget moving forward, and a big thing for police is looking at service models. You know, we've looked at they piloted and looked at best practices, and now we have civilian crash investigators that are new and up and running, and those are trying to help. I think you mentioned recently a council meeting about, you know, the lag time. If it's a non-emergency fender bender, you know, you might have to wait a long time, whereas now where the city's being more responsive to be able to get somebody out there quickly and get people trained up when it's not an emergency situation, to be able to help you in those type of circumstances. And it also, even more importantly, frees up our police resources to be able to have more capacity to do the emergency calls. and telecommunicators. So we've got more telecommunicators to help with the burden on the 911 system and help allocate, analyze the calls, and get the service providers out as quickly as possible. And then some of the potential needs on the horizon is analyzing the demand for sworn positions. So we will be looking at, and I think I'm getting ahead, but we're looking at trending down in the vacancy rate. Okay, we're going to need to analyze the right mix of sworn positions versus operation positions versus our population versus our calls for service. Employer contributions to the retirement system to make sure the health of all our retirement systems remain up to par, and ongoing technology replacement, the fleet, the cameras, again with the radios. Those are some essential equipment, but they also is costly and has to be replaced over time. And long-term considerations for police, again, the vacancy rates are trending down, and that's great. That shows that we're doing better at recruit and retention, and that's another impetus for us being able to develop a strong pay plan moving forward for the new fiscal year. Vacancy savings, though, have helped to cover some staffing needs, some equipment, some needs for overtime that have been offset. The overtime has helped offset some of our vacancies, and that's going to be something that we're going to look at and analyze moving forward into the next budget cycle. And future staffing allocations, you know, when we get to that point, what's a sufficient level of officers and how do we fund a sufficient complement to meet this community's needs? And now I'd like to turn over to our budget manager, Ethan Smith, to talk some about compensation and benefits.
Right. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. My name is Ethan Smith. I'm your strategy and budget manager. And I get to talk a little bit about one of the essentials of a well-managed government, which is all the things that we do to recruit and retain the best and brightest employee talent. And to start out, it's been an extraordinary time to be a city employee. The positive vacancy rates and hiring trends that Marie talked about, those did not happen automatically or overnight. They were the result of a series of historic investments, some of the largest investments in employee pay that we made in decades. And to be sure, some of that was targeted at a specific moment in time. Where inflation rates were high and in an incredibly high, highly competitive job market. But some of these were structural improvements as well that will continue to pay dividends and drive costs in this budget and in the years to come. And some examples of that, we added shift differential and commercial driver's license incentives that continue to compound on the annual increases that employees get. We made structural adjustments to the public safety pay plan. And as we added some top steps, most of our public safety employees did not benefit from those top steps at the time, but many have become eligible in this budget cycle and in the next budget cycle to receive those top steps, for example. And as you can see here, these investments have been proportionate to the distribution of our positions overall, which means that an overwhelming majority of those investments are public safety investments. And while inflation has impacted the effect of these pay increases, it's a tremendous competitive advantage for us that these have kept pace with inflation for most employees, and it is something that not all employers can say. So prior to these three extraordinary years in the pre-COVID times, a typical pay plan would look something like this. Public safety would receive between 4% and 6% comprised of two components, 2.5% to 5% step for most public safety pay plan employees, and then a market adjustment, typically around 1.5%, which was designed to protect the purchasing power of those employees that had already reached the top step and received all the eligible step increases in the public safety pay plan. Then general employees would receive closer to 3%. For salaried employees, that was all distributed through a merit pool, whereas hourly employees, that would be split between some sort of general wage increase and a merit pool comparable to the salary pay plan. And while inflation has remained stubbornly above the 2% Federal Reserve target, at present, each of these plans for most employees would keep pace with inflation across each of these plans. But certainly something we will continue to monitor going forward. So put in the context of the general fund outlook, with a typical, if you add a typical pay plan on top of our general fund expenditures, it leaves about a $16.5 million gap. That number's closer to $22 million with a more enhanced version of the pay plan. And this is typical for where we are at this time of the year. And in fact, we believe we've solved about a third of this with a combination of revenue and expenditure strategies. We are certainly continuing to evaluate those and vet those and work through additional options going forward, and we're not going to rest until we balance this thing. There is, I will just add one kind of word of caution that, as Indem kind of indicated, there is slightly more economic uncertainty at this point than in previous years. So consistent with our kind of theme of bridge year budget, we'll continue to be very deliberate and thoughtful as we evaluate both compensation packages and the rest of the budget going forward. With that said, any well-managed government is going to compete for employee talent. So there may be some areas that we could have some targeted focus where the data shows that we can be a little bit more competitive. Here's some examples of where we've done that in the past. We boosted city minimum wage. We've targeted our lowest paid employees more broadly with minimum pay increases, for example, giving them at least a $3,600 per year increase that helps a broader pool of those hourly employees boost their pay. We've made changes to the public safety pay plan, for example, adding steps to the top where retention is an area of focus, or boosting starting pay when recruitment is an emphasis for us, and then added certain types of incentive pay where there are areas that need to target. So as always, we're going to continue to evaluate and consider if there are areas that require some added emphasis and where the data shows we can be a little bit more competitive. So the city's approach to competitive compensation does not end with wages, also focused on total compensation, which includes competitive benefits. And Sheila and Christine and their team, they do just an incredible job of prioritizing employee well-being, health, and the financial stability that comes with that. Most of this comes in the form of our 3 healthcare plans. 30% of enrolled employees take advantage of our health savings account. It's a high deductible plan. The other 70% take advantage of our preferred provider organization, our PPO plans, with The smallest contingent, they're taking advantage of Plan E, which is our higher premium, lower deductible plan, and that's just slightly below 12% of enrolled employees. And these are really, these medical and prescription benefits drive 80% of the healthcare costs for the city. And unfortunately, these healthcare costs are not immune to inflation. Since 2020, medical costs for the city have increased just below 6% per year, while prescription costs have increased closer to 10% per year. And even though the city that you can see here with the green bars actively manages our costs below national trends here in the blue bars, something we can certainly take some pride in, these costs are still higher than general inflation and certainly higher than general fund revenue growth. Nonetheless, in the spirit of being a competitive employer, the city has prioritized employees by taking the brunt of these inflationary healthcare costs in recent years. And this is consistent with what other employers are doing in a very tight labor market. And while these have been intentional efforts on our part to cap the growth in employees' healthcare costs in recent years, it has had the effect of skewing some of the cost share of these plans away from the traditional targets. So this is certainly something that we will continue to monitor going forward. So as always, we're going to balance being an employer of choice with what is financially feasible and sustainable for the organization. So just a couple of budget takeaways here. We've done and will continue to do what is necessary to remain a competitive employer. But it should be clear that these investments are not without cost. Since 2018, the city's contribution in healthcare have increased 29%. So in FY25 general fund terms, that is $12.4 million. And these are recurring costs that we will need to budget for in 26 and in the years to come. And that is before you factor in the cost of adding new employees, which we have done and will continue to need to do. And so I'll just conclude by saying we will continue to assess our benefits and compensation packages and how best we can remain competitive while also, as always, balancing the city's financial outlook. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. So with all this information, wrapping up into, okay, what does this mean looking forward? Funding look ahead. Okay, we're always analyzing our accounts. And as today we talked about some at your annual strategy session, and again today, we're balanced but for a pay plan. We have $500,000 surplus in terms that could be put towards a pay plan, but that's not enough. But we're, as always, continuing to look for efficiencies, analyzing our accounts, looking at revenues, looking at our chargebacks for services, to be able to develop a solid pay plan moving for your consideration moving into 2026. And then how do we do that? Here's just a little handful of some of the things we do. We definitely look at team of teams approaches. How can we capitalize on expertise across departments and efforts across departments instead of each department trying on their own sometimes? Redirecting funds to core services. Some of our services, with flat revenues, we really need to make sure and hammer down and make sure our core services are fully funded before we branch out into any enhancements. So that's something we're really taking a hard look at. Processing and reporting efficiencies through ERP. This won't be realized immediately as we're still getting our new ERP system up and running, but we should be able to have some efficiencies, more reporting capacity, capabilities, and some, hopefully streamlined services that we can reap the benefits for in a future budget cycle. Also, technology efficiencies such as artificial intelligence and other kinds of automation. We're really exploring those and how can, as that world is evolving, how can we roll that into, like for 311, when you get a call that someone can use AI to get a quick answer and then save time for the actual person call taker to be able to serve the person in the community that has a more complex need. And also, as we mentioned, the cost recovery options. And before, and it just even the budget cycle, if you look at Team of Teams, internal Team of Teams is your budget cycle as well. You see a handful of us during the budget season, but it's also Sheila and her team, her whole team, some over here, Teresa and Matt and their teams, and then we have some of our main department customers over here. In each department, there's people that we're tapping their expertise and their knowledge of their day-to-day services and their funding needs to be able to pull together to present through the manager to the manager and then roll into our 2026 budget. But it's really a team of teams, internal team of teams approach. But some of the considerations for 2025 that we're definitely keeping our eye on moving into 2026, we have some overtime in public safety and solid waste that's affecting us right now in 2025 that we're looking at and monitoring closely. Some of it we'll get reimbursement for, but when we have like a snowstorm, we won't. So there's things that we're looking for and accounting for and increased demands from growth. We're also looking at, and I briefly touched on it before, fleet maintenance costs. Before, if we ordered a fire engine, we'd get it in roughly a year and a half. Now it's taken 4 years. So from 4 years from the time we placed that. So we're already at projecting a piece of equipment that's into useful life, and now we're having to pay a lot higher cost in maintenance and creating downtime for our staff by having to maintain older equipment that's past its useful life. So we're working into upsize our ordering and understand the impact of that and getting ahead of that 4-year cycle moving forward. But right now, we're having to deal with impacts of higher maintenance costs around that. So those are just a couple of things that are happening now in 25 that we're going to be addressing when we're developing the 2026 budget. And then that's pretty much wraps it up, but just again, here's the highlights. We're planning and I believe you got this all at the council committee discussion session last month, or earlier this month actually, but the enterprise funds are going to the committee, and I'm sure the chair will reiterate, you're all welcome to attend any of those committees you have interest in, but they're presenting at the committee level, and then our next time together in this room will be March 24th. For that budget workshop, we'll be giving a capital projects update, looking at our solid waste services and financial partners. And I think we mentioned briefly, Cherry's got our hands full with 51 financial partners, and we're going to be analyzing that and get you that packet as soon as possible, but definitely well ahead of your March 24th meeting. And thank you, and that's all we had. We'll definitely take questions.
Thank you. You have really introduced this in a very easy to read and lots of diagrams, and thank you for the work that you all are doing to get this accomplished. But now I think that we have to remember that it's now the council's turn to do some work and think about what they would want to do and how they see. And so my suggestion, I think, would be to start with Ms. Mayfield and come around, and maybe we could do this, 3 to 4, I'm sorry. Oh, do you want to go before the manager? I mean, the manager after, and then we can just go around and have council members comment for after the manager makes his presentation.
Okay, I'll be super quick. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Marie, can you just go back to the vacancy slide? So a couple things that I want to highlight before we go into the round robin. We ended the FY '24 fiscal year with about $500,000 to the good on the expenditure side. The reason why we had a sizable surplus is because of the revenue side. So if you start to think about many of the discussions, it is pretty tight on the expenditure side. Marie more or less said today that at the current fiscal year will be tight also. There are some things that are going on that we expect some reimbursements, but may not get them. But we're not sounding any alarm. We will figure out the current fiscal year. One thing that's also super important is year over year, we scrub accounts, and Marie is not really liked right now, folks, so she could get, some encouragement because she's making sure that every department is really going into their accounts and not having any fluff or things of that nature, and that's what the budget office is doing. I will say this, some of the stress that we will have, and the reason I'm here, is that in 2021, 2022, in the same room, people were concerned about the ability to retain folks and to be able to provide minimal services. Cities across the country weren't collecting solid waste. So all of your strategies around retention have really paid off. I know the question comes up to Sheila every year. I'll try my best, Sheila, to answer it. People will say, what is a good vacancy rate, or what is a standard? And I think we've been saying 10%, if I have that right. So you're, by every measure, we're doing much, much better than we were in 2022. What occurs, before I'll end with this, Mayor, is that we find problems like fire inspections. That wasn't working. So what we had to do was change the way we paid people. We had to ask some people to, work overtime or maybe even get folks out of retirement. Same thing with 311 call takers. We're having some stress around 911 now and some of the response times. But what we do is we try to lock into those areas where we're having a dip in some level of service and try to address it. And so I don't walk away from, there have been some good compensation packages over the last few years, and they were needed. And so we shouldn't walk away from that because it put us in a position so that we have the number of staff that we need to provide, great services. But we will have our challenges in the current fiscal year as well as FY '26.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. All right, Ms. Mayfield.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Marie, and entire budget team that's here. Thank y'all for a very comprehensive breakdown of where we are. So, Manager, thinking about what you just shared, since this focus is really around compensation, and the bulk of our compensation is around the support we need in police and fire as the city, we're anticipated, by 2030, almost another 100,000 plus individuals moving to the region. The question I have for you, Mr. Manager, is where in that conversation, which you and I have discussed previously, our training facility at fire. And as we have experienced a number of fires that are unusual, as well as when we look at how we build today versus years ago, you may have a building that's on an acre plus of land. We're doing a lot of infill building. Unfortunately, a lot of these buildings the fire is moving much quicker than, unfortunately, we just had over the weekend, another fire that moved pretty quickly. Are we in a place, even though there may be some shortfalls coming, for us to have real conversations around council where we can at least get some proposals or at least get an idea of the numbers to do some of the upgrades that may be needed in order to make sure that our class, shout out to our chief who's here, I was able to attend Friday. We graduated fire class 124, 13 started, 13 graduated, but wanting to make sure that they have the proper training resources.
A great question, Councilmember Mayfield. What we do during this budget workshop period, we also give you an update on our facilities and the facility needs assessment. So that will be later in the workshop, but we'll take note of that and have not just what we're doing in terms of fire, but also all of our other city facilities and what kind of needs are there. Yes.
That does help, but I definitely appreciate our budget team working the numbers and Manager Jones, your leadership with the increases that we have seen, because as we want to be a city of choice, we definitely want the city of Charlotte to be an employer of choice. And we know with the rising cost of everything, that increasing our salary has helped some of our employees to stay within the city limits, because there's also that conversation where a large number of our staff, police and fire, do not live within city limits. So that also means as we're trying to attract you to the area where you're paying property tax, maybe in the county, some may be even a little further than the county, but how does that help our city continue to grow? Those are really the only questions I had, Madam Mayor. Mainly just wanted to tell staff, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I know it's difficult, because I know I wouldn't want you telling me that I have to cut my budget 5%, 10%. So for all the department leads that are out there, know that you have a staff and a team that's really trying to make sure that you have the resources you need, but also make sure that we are a growing city and not a city in deficit. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bakari?
Thank you. First, Marie, if you need any help or tips being the bad guy, I'm here. I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. I just say one theme of which I would like us to focus and prepare for proactively through this budget process that we're now embarking, takes from what we did at the end of last budget, and kind of we had a group of us that were interested in seeing where we could, make some cuts, potentially lower taxes, put our fingerprint in a little more meaningful way to the budget process than normal. And I think the flaw last time was, one, timing. We kind of all got behind it at the very end, and the big punchline was, man, we should have started this 3 months ago. We would have actually had a shot. So I think we're in a good spot now to take that on. And then the second piece is line of sight and visibility into the underlying pieces where we could have that exercise. And I think that boils down to like 3 major buckets that hopefully this will be a helpful guide as we figure out it's not all one-way presentations. We have some offline work we need to do, and we have to be armed for that. But the first bucket is, while everything that we do is awesome in some way, we don't always have to do everything, and we can prioritize by stop doing some things and reprioritizing those efforts and capital behind other things that we want to do at even higher level. I think a good example of that one, I'll just throw this out there because it's one takeaway I'd like to have, but in general, that EMS and the slides that were on fire's relation to emergency calls.
Medic.
Yeah, the medic stuff, the only punchline I take away from all of that is, we do this stuff, costs us $20 a call, we get reimbursed $6. So I know there's a lot more underneath the surface of the iceberg going on there, and I don't want to step in the way of that, but I would just say, I think that's something either we should continue doing at $20 or not do. And I think that the bigger theme in all of this is not just us, but our touch point with the county and other bodies as it relates to maybe this is the process with enough lead time where we could start, saying, okay, you take these things, because that makes sense, we'll take these things, but our budget should be fully contained in a way that we don't have these huge outliers where we're spending a lot of money on things that started as some kind of favor along the way and turned into a large thing. So I think that's one example. The second bucket are things that we should continue to do, but we should do more efficiently. And I think this requires us to have the insights and ask the questions. I just recently asked your staff for some data points to help me in one specific thing, which is permitting. And, post UDO and the world we're in, is there not just like, here's how many people it takes to run the permitting process, but how many things are passing on the first pass versus not? What are the buckets? Why are they taking so long? And can we adjust some processes that we find efficiencies as well, not just throw money at what's necessary? And then the third bucket is things we should continue to do, but really prioritize the impact we're trying to make and figure out what policy items need to go along with what budget investments are being made. And too many examples there are, CMPD is by and large our largest kind of, FTE expenditure. But I really want to be able to see things like employee satisfaction reporting, how they view what's going on, because it isn't just about percentages of, okay, here's what you get. It's how are we aligning our policy to go along with that investment to make sure that we are moving the needle and we're looking at how that improves over time. And the second one is also, I've just been getting a ton of calls and messages and things lately from former CMPD officers and other first responders who are injured in the line of duty, who are medically retired, they are required to be, and they are struggling, and these are terrible stories as it relates to the system is not set up to help them. Now, there are going to be some state aspects to that, which could go to our legislative agenda, but I definitely want to, it's been more than one. It's been a lot more than one, and I think people are really struggling to figure out what to do. So looking at those kind of things to prioritize in those buckets would be what I would hope we could get out of it. And the big punchline message here is we will fail, and we will probably be in a frustrated point if we are in the last 2 weeks of this budget process and we start to get vocal about this. I think we learned last year we have to start early, but if we could have a meaningful impact in a way that I haven't had in 8 or 9 budget cycles here, now that we learned that lesson last year. We saw what it was like when we got behind. I've already had conversations with some of my colleagues that have already expressed interest in doing that again. So I think we can do it in a productive and collaborative way with staff if we can just get organized and make sure we have offline work that's armed and locked and loaded for us to figure out where we want to focus.
Okay. Mr. Jones, yes.
Thank you, Councilmember Bakari. Marie, just I want to make sure that a little bit of level setting. The medic piece is that the towns are getting like $20 a call. The city's
Correct,
getting
sorry,
like
and I didn't want to
6,
interrupt
but
Mr. Bakari, but
the
yes.
real cost is a lot more than the 20, I think is the.
Right, we're getting
Okay.
$500,000 and running approximately 85,000. So, I mean, it would vary by year based on, because we have a flat amount, but it's closer to 120 per call is our actually fully loaded cost.
Okay, so it's worse than the shocking example I used. Got it. So, I mean, that, to me, like, I get why in the bureaucracy of multi-government agencies and things, it's difficult, it's a negotiation. But this is a great one for us policymakers on both bodies to sit back and say, like, what are we doing? Because that's to me, like, that should be solved. We shouldn't negotiate to a slightly less worse deal.
So I just want to say that this is not just us. It's every one of the northern towns and the southern towns are thinking about this. So it's actually a regional concern with that. And so we'll see with that, how that can play. So with that, anything else?
Yes, chapter 2. No,
Could I
I'm
ask that
done.
question?
Isn't chapter 2 bankruptcy?
It's question mark.
Okay.
7 and
3's
11.
profit.
Mr. Driggs?
Thank you. So I appreciate the presentation. Frankly, there's not enough here yet for me to kind of get into a detailed critique. I did want to ask, when I look at the expenditure growth forecast, there's actually a lot that goes into that, and so I'd like more detail about how we arrive at that. What kind of growth assumptions are we building in? I assume we've got the whole year adjustments in there for people that joined during the year, but kind of interested to know what the basis is for that. CMPD staffing, I think we are intending to step up staffing at CMPD, if I understand. I think we need to, frankly. And I'm hearing again complaints about unsafe conditions uptown, lack of visibility of CMPD. I mean, the chief can advise us about that, but that's kind of a noise I'm hearing. And I want to be sure that we adequately resource. Anecdotally, I mentioned at an earlier meeting that some of the officers down in South Division said they couldn't get those display screens for speed. The robot speed traps, speed measurement, they're not traps, but, and they were told there's no money for that. And I don't understand that. This is like a $40,000 item that they feel is quite effective. They were talking about how Matthews and Pineville have these great things, these displays, and they are told we can't afford them. So that's just an anecdote, but want to make sure we're adequately resourced there. And I guess that gets me to my most general comment, which is there's a lot of talk about inflation in here and how a lot of these costs have gone up. The revaluation process does not include inflation. And there are some slides in here, I don't know if we talked about them, but so in essence, if property values go up by 40% and inflation was, say, 10%, then our costs have gone up by 10% because of inflation. But then when we do a reval based on 40% and reset our rate, that gets taken away from us. So in real terms, the revaluation process is eroding our ability to pay for services because those service costs are going up and the property tax component is not. So I said last year what concerns me about that is we may be setting ourselves up. Like if we're not careful, we may be setting ourselves up for difficult decisions in the future. I don't want to be kicking cans down the road. And during this budget process, if we have some kind of alchemy that says that we can do it without a tax increase, count me in, yes. But the question is how? And are we eroding any kind of fundamental services of the city in order not to have a tax increase while still maintaining a lot of our investment in corridors and the other things that we're doing? I want to make sure that we are properly attending to the basic responsibilities of government and that we are anticipating what it's going to take in the future to continue to do that. And if it's too easy for us to absorb an erosion of purchasing power because of the way our rate is reset, I have to ask myself, what were we doing before? Like what was it that we were able to do that let us absorb an erosion of those dollars with no pain? And I'm just, careful in terms of talking to the community about a kind of alchemy where look at the wonderful things we can do and there's no pain involved. So I don't want pain. I certainly don't want a tax increase, but I am just concerned that somehow it's being made to look as if we're able to digest all of that inflation without a commensurate increase in revenues, and there is no cost associated with that. So as I say, this is just something as we go into the greater detail in the budget process that I'm going to be looking at, particularly public safety. In this expenditure growth forecast, have we built in an increase in sworn officers? Is there an assumption about that?
No, that's not an assumption about that, Councilmember Driggs, but I will tell you this, the way that we are planning the FY26 budget would be, we would not put ourselves in a position that if either chief wanted to have a recruit class, that they couldn't do it because of the lack of position. So there's a concept called overhires, which allows you to have the people come in with the assumption that by the end of the year, you may be at the same level that you were in terms of personnel because you have some retirements. So there is nothing in this budget, upcoming budget, that wouldn't allow for recruit classes there's a little bit of a difference of opinion about when we will be fully staffed. But either way you look at it, we would not put ourselves in a position to not be able to have recruit classes. To the point that you made, which is very, very good, Councilman Rodriguez, about this budget and moving forward, and I guess that's why I said what I said at the beginning. We'll have some pain. There'll be some decisions that we have to make, because we are at the point where on the expenditure side, $500,000 on 900 million is, you can't do it.
Significant.
You're right. So we have been very lucky or fortunate because the revenue side has come in so much that we can, one, support our 16% reserve that we have to do, and then have almost $14 million one time that's left over. So NDEM talked a lot about sales tax. So when you think about the property tax and the sales tax together, I think it's almost 70% of the revenue, 70% of the revenue that we have. And as you've said, part of that revenue stream, the property tax, we just don't get the growth when you get to a reval. And when you have sales tax coming in at 1.6%, we have to be careful about the revenue source, which has bailed us out each year, moving forward.
So sales tax is roughly a half of the property tax, if I remember, something like that. And it does go up with inflation. It also goes up with the economy. Property tax doesn't do any of that, right? You get reset back to the break-even number in nominal terms, and then that's what you get. And you have some organic growth because of new construction, which reflects the growth in our population. But that's my point, though. I just don't think these revenue sources track the rise in our expenses, to which inflation applies to all of it, right? And we have inflationary growth and sales. We have but all of what we spend. So in that sense, I just see in a big picture a kind of organic tension. Sure. And I want to make sure we don't resolve that with shortcuts. I think we're cutting near the bone, frankly. And there are always opportunities to achieve greater efficiencies, to look critically at the lowest priority programs that we have and spending that we do. But by now, the disconnect between the historical property tax rate and our reliance on it to pay our bills is getting pretty large. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Graham?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I really don't have a lot. I want to thank staff for, again, the work that they're doing and foundation setting for us. I think that's the exercise that we're going through today, and so I look forward to being a lot more vocal as we get into the more specifics, the details of the budget moving forward. I will say something because Mr. Bukhari brought it up. I hope that as a council that we operate in an environment where there's no surprises, right? Because last year was not our finest hour from my perspective, and we ended up going right back where we started from because there wasn't a meeting in the minds of all the members. And so hopefully we can do better. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Ajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Great job, Marie and the team. I have 4 items. Well, some of the things that I wanted to say have already been said. In terms of, so first, cost recovery. So you brought up MATIC example. Are there other cost recovery agreement that we need to look into other than the one that you had mentioned earlier?
Not so substantial as that. That's a emergent, more sharp example, but every year we look at cost recovery. So be it user fees, solid waste fees, like we mentioned, solid waste fees go up because the tipping fees at the landfill goes up. But, so we're always analyzing that to make sure and update those costs, but not an example like that.
Got it. So I know that parking was one of the cost recovery, and we had raised that. I was looking at it through from the budget, and it looks like we are at the recovery point, at least from the parking fees and how much expense it accrues for us to maintain that. or how much we were paying a vendor. I would like to see if you can provide a list of cost recovery models and in terms of the contracts that we have and where there is a significant variance. Second, in terms of the healthcare costs, it's great that we are using that. That certainly helps with retention because we have seen healthcare costs continues to rise. And Sheila, your team does a great job with walking us through year over year our healthcare plan and the healthcare options. I would be interested in seeing I know we have this very innovative model that is probably one of the first in the state, and that is our clinic, our Marathon, now it's called Marathon Health, where when it was first implemented, or at least when around 2017, 2018 timeframe, we were one of the first in the region to have implemented that. And as a result, we were able to get a same-day appointments. Now they have partnered with other organizations, including the county. And certainly, I have seen where walk-in appointments are no longer available, or same day, or even 2 days. I wanted to see, in terms of the service levels and appointments access, has that gone down as a result, and how about our costs? So if we can just sort of look at that in depth, that would be helpful. And number 3, I appreciate, Marie, you and your team going through efficiencies every year, right? That's where all the departments start looking at, it's sort of level setting, right? If we can see in past 5 years, there have certainly been a lot that we have been able to successfully identify in our efficiencies list. I would like to see, we have been given numbers, but I would like to see what contributed to that.
Yes, ma'am.
If you could help us get that list. And the last, certainly not the list, I have, you mentioned a couple of things when it comes to fire CFD and how our leading time has gone up with apparatus and other equipments. Do we have, I've heard this from firefighters that currently less than what it used to be. And I would like to see less than what it used to be. And I would like to see from Chief, if we can get a list of, how many do we have in reserve and what it used to be, so that we have we can really get sort of a more relational relationship as to whether we need to be ahead of it. Just because the lead time has gone up, do we need to start planning, a year or two in advance? And one example that I've been also given from firefighters is commercial burn building. Do we have a need for that? From my conversations with some firefighters, they said that we need to build that as part of our fire training academy. I would be interested in seeing, learning more about it. I'm not an expert, but if we can get Chief Johnson to respond to that. That's all I have for now. I'm sure there'll be more coming, and I know we are going to take deeper dive into our enterprise funds. So I have some questions about Charlotte Water and other, but I certainly appreciate the work that the staff has done, and Mr. Jones, for your leadership. It's great to see what team has done.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Johnson, I know that you came in, and I hope Bishop had a great birthday party and lots of candles and cake and ice cream. So I don't know if you want to start now. We have Ms. Watlington to go next, or you. Tell me which way you'd like to go.
I'll just be brief. Thank you for saying that. No, another party's tonight, but I'll be missing that one. But that's okay. I'm here for the people. Anyway, thank you for the presentation. I look forward to the details. I will just continue to lift up, we spoke about courageous leadership. during our retreat. The budget is where the rubber hits the road. So I hope that council's ready to really look at the budget from an equitable perspective and make those tough decisions while considering that people are hurting. People are hurting in our city. So I hope that we continue to remember that as we're looking at any increases, property sales tax or anything. So I want to continue to lift up things from an equitable lens and just hope that we keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Watlington, you're up.
Couple of things. I will say that in addition to many other comments that my colleagues already made, I do think that we need to take a strategic look at how we approach this. We have been having this conversation since last year, so thank you for the work that you've done to date here in analyzing our accounts. And I see the notes around efficiency. I do agree that we need to take a look at our budget as a team in working sessions. I still fundamentally believe that we need to start at the very, very beginning and really analyze what we're doing. But beyond that, I ask the same question every year, and I'm still waiting on an answer that I already have, and it's associated with our revenue and the real cost of growth. We talk about how growth is saving our lives, because if it weren't for the growth, we wouldn't be able to offset these dollars. But if it weren't for the growth, we wouldn't need as much expense. So until we are ready to really deal with that conversation and what it means to be strategic about how we grow and when we grow, I think that we're spinning our wheels in some cases around this budget. So that is what I would like us to be spending our energy on, is really truly understanding, getting with policy economists and understand for cities that have this dense urban core and have these surrounding regions that are benefiting from property taxes that we never see while folks may be coming in and working. We really are not seeing that offsetting much of our costs in terms of infrastructure. So that, to me, is the elephant in the room. And that's the piece that we need to really address in a serious way as we look to not just this year's budget, but our outer years' budgets as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe has everyone had an opportunity to speak? And I think that we've gone around. To the staff, is there any further, Marie, do you have any further comments?
No, thank you,
Mr. Jones,
ma'am.
anything else? Then with that, it is time for us to go into a closed session.
The motion for
Yes,
closed
if
session?
you would, please.
Okay, the motion should state that, that the body will go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, section, 143-218, section, .11A3, to consult with the city attorney to preserve the attorney-client privilege in the matters of Michael Crumpner versus City of Charlotte, 23 CBS 4394, and the matter of Robert Sheridan III versus City of Charlotte, 24 CV 034330. That would be the motion.
May I have 6 council members make a, we have the motion?
You still have a quorum, so if we can have the motion.
So moved.
Made by Malcolm Graham, seconded.
Okay, all right, I couldn't hear. Made by
Second.
Mr. Driggs.
Okay.
And who second? Ms. Mayfield, second?
No,
Okay.
Mr. Griggs seconded, and Malcolm made it.
Opposite, thank you, okay. All right, so we'll give everybody a moment, a bathroom break.
Is there a
we'll get
vote on
out,
the
and then
motion?
if we can come back as soon as possible.
You have to vote on the
We have to
motion.
vote. All in favor of the motion? All in favor, raise your hands. I need 6. 1, 2, 3,
Okay,
4.
Malcolm's there.
I need 6.
You don't need, you need a majority of the council at this
Okay,
point.
majority. There we go then.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll be